So welcome to the uvwasi team meeting for June 19th, 2023. We'll follow our standard approach of going through the issues tagged on the agenda for number 216, plus anything else that people have to go over. So before we get started, any news that people would like to share?
I was going to share that I think on the last meeting, I shared that I landed the installable changes so that you could install uvwasi. So I'm now getting around to actually consuming it, and it's working on Mac and it's working on Windows. I'm having a problem on Linux, so I might actually need to update the stuff I did once I figure out what the problem is. But it's basically, it's like it can't find one of the pieces that it needs, whether that's a header or whether that's the archive. But I haven't gotten to spend enough time to figure out, like, to pinpoint the issue. But yeah, it's making good progress, and we're going to have a use case of actually like having that being consumed, which is going to be pretty cool.
Okay, cool. Okay, any other news people would like to share?
Nothing major on my side. We do have progress on some WASI virtualization workflows, which I can potentially share after we've gone through the normal items if there's time.
Sounds good. Okay, yeah, so we'll quickly go through the other things because I think they'll go pretty quickly. The first one, the WASI preview 1, if the redir ignores cookie argument, I don't think there's any update on that. In terms of implementing the 4 stubbed out socket methods, I've been working on that at least a few hours every week and making progress. I think I have a pretty good sort of baseline, which passes on Linux. Unfortunately, in the CI, it seems to hang on Windows and Mac. I did put together a Windows machine today, and it popped up some what looked like debug kind of things to me. So I made some initialization, added some, like, it was basically saying you're using these things that weren't initialized, which shouldn't have mattered since we weren't using them, but maybe it's something in Windows that was just popping up a window and hanging. So I pushed that, although the CI seemed to take forever. Like the Windows one is still running after an hour, so I'm never sure if that's like my problem. It's going to hang after some amount of time on those. But anyway, I guess the long and short of it is making pretty good progress, at least on Linux. So that now it's maybe going to be the harder part of finding some of the other platforms to figure out why it's not just working there. I assume it's something timing wise or something in the tests, and that, like, libuv should be giving us equivalent functionality for the socket stuff, but still need to figure that out. And then the other one we have on the agenda is just the changes to the WASI spec and snapshot preview 2. So I don't know if that's related to the update you're going to give us, Sky, or something different.
Yeah, I mean, the best person to update on the current preview 2 status and what API changes are necessary is probably Pat, because he's been working a bunch on the streams at the moment, but I can also go through it. I don't know if you want to say anything, Pat.
Yeah, like I mean, certainly progress has been ongoing. Like we are going to make some changes to the streams interface to enable back pressure, because really can't do streams without back pressure, and that wasn't fully and properly specified at the start. There's just various changes ongoing that are just informed by all of our implementations. So lots of other smaller changes in like file system APIs and the CLI world and stuff like that. If you don't have an implementation right now, it's not really meaningful. These changes are just what they are. They're just updates to the spec informed by our progress. We're currently trying to, we're coming up with a plan for how we're going to release preview 2 where Preview 2 means a guarantee of essentially cross-vendor stability for quite a long time. So Dan is going to present that plan at our very next WebAssembly subgroup meeting. So that's the spec group that meets. And so that's next Thursday. And the very short version of that proposal is we're going to take the set of interfaces and worlds for doing CLI commands, which is basically like the set of stuff you could already do with Preview 1, where it's set up to run like a command line interface program. We also have this new HTTP proxy world, where it's designed to be invoked by some incoming HTTP request and get past that and be able to send a response and then do outbound HTTP. So that's like the very basic lowest amount of features web server world. We're going to standardize Preview 2, starting with saying that both of those are stable. And then as additional worlds become ready, the implementations get to a status where we can be sure that multiple vendors are going to support them, then we can add those to Preview 2 and say, that they've reached Preview 2 as like a milestone. So that's our rough plan right now. And again, we don't have a date. We're shooting to do this in the fall, and it's very hard to pick a date right now because there's implementation scattered across many different companies. So we're trying to get our plan together one step at a time.
But in terms of like API stability, as far as I'm aware, roughly where that CLI world is right now for features like clocks, environment, the most of the file system stuff, basically just down to these stream changes, and then maybe some other changes. It's starting to get to a place where it's mostly stable, or
yeah, just because I haven't looked in a little bit, there's some places where implementation puts things in slightly different namespaces than they are upstream in the spec, which is really just a question of how we organize stuff. It shouldn't be semantically meaningful. So I think all of that hasn't bottomed out yet at getting everything upstream, mostly because we don't feel the pressure to do that right now while we're iterating. But we'll try to do that soon. So and there's another big change coming that I haven't talked about yet. The last big component model feature that we were trying to get done before Preview 2 is called resources. And that is what enables a lot of this virtualization work. The short of it is that the component model spec repo stuff is done. A lot of the low-level implementations in Wasmtime and other related tooling is under code review right now. Higher level integrations with binding generators is in progress. There's a draft version of WASI that is translated from using just U32 indexes to actually using the resource types. So that's like another real big step of anybody who's using the prototyping stuff. It's going to break all of their code, and because it's a total change of the type system. But once the tooling is all there, then we'll do that big step all together in our implementation and put it in the spec repo. So that's another aspect of what's going on right now.
Okay, anything else worth mentioning on that front before we move on to guys' update on virtualization stuff? If not, Guy, why don't you take it away?
sure. I'll just share my screen and show don't really have a demo, but I can at least go through the overall project and share what it's about. Right. So this is the WASI Vert project, which is a new project we've been working on for virtualization of WASI components. So the gist of it is that because this component model is, the APIs are designed in a way that they're all high-level interfaces, it provides very strong virtualization primitives that you wouldn't normally necessarily be able to do so easily. And this initial version is very simple. It just does environment variable virtualization. So you can set some environment variables, and at a component level, the component will import the WASI subsystems which are described in these worlds. So the virtual adapter will import, in this simple example, it'll import the environment variables interfaces, and then it'll export them again. And by doing that, this becomes a virtual component because it exports the environment interface and it imports the environment interface. And that environment interface is itself defined in this environment file, which has a get environment and a get arguments. So it's these the two kind of lookups that you would do to kind of get that ambient information, environment information, where it's returning a list of tuples of string pairs of the environment variable and its value. So by virtualizing this, we can intercept that return value. And because this is a high-level value type, everything there, we have all the context. We don't need to maintain, lots of side tables and things. You have the direct context in this interface for the virtualization. So you can intercept that function. You can provide different values, and you can entirely choose whether you want to still go to the end host to get the environment variables, or if you want to actually remove the final host, get environment imports. So when you build an application, if I just go into the test folder here, you can kind of see that. If I've got an application that's reading environment variables in Rust, that when I compile it into Preview 1 is going to be using the Preview 1 environment APIs. When I turn it into a component, it's going to be using the this environment interface in that WebAssembly component to get the environment at the low-level API call. So WASI Vert allows us to construct a intermediate component for this virtualization. And so the way it works is there's also a CLI. So you can basically call WASI Vert and it'll output that intermediate component for you. So this is just the very initial thing, just doing the environment variables. So you can say, I want to allow the host environment variables or deny them. And then I want to override and provide these specific environment variables. And that'll actually inline that behavior into a WebAssembly component that's, I think it's about 30 kilobytes or so. And that'll fully virtualize the environment system. And then obviously the point is that we should be able to have virtualization across different APIs. So to use it, you would run Wasm Tools Compose. I'm looking at making the CLI easier to use as well, even, but you would just take a normal application component, and then you would compose it with the virtualized component that you created. And then you would get the final component, which actually has both components embedded inside of it, the original component and this virtualized adapter. And that's the kind of virtualization that WebAssembly components enable. So you can take something that runs as a CLI, you can virtualize it, and you can put it in a browser environment, and you can be converting between different interfaces. So it's kind of those same kind of cross-platform problems where you can map from the POSIX model into virtualizations of it that can then themselves be embedded virtualizations. So yeah, that's the goal for the project. Environment is obviously a very simple initial case to just kind of prove out the model. And then I've got a PR up that adds the file system virtualization, which is a draft PR. I'm still just finishing it off, and that kind of extends the virtual adapter to then also have the FS APIs and be able to virtualize across the WASI FS APIs, which are basically these functions, the WASI FS functions, which is the same sort of functions we would need to implement in uvwasi to be able to support the standard WASI interfaces. And that is itself also defined in this WIT folder. So it extends the virtualization to support not just the environment, but also the pre-opens file system and streams. Just to show again where that came from, in the WIT, there's the file system interfaces, which are defined here, which define all of the file system interfaces that we're virtualizing. It's the standard POSIX interfaces in the Preview 2 model. So we've got the errors, and then further down we have the actual functions here, like read via stream, write via stream, and the various FS functions that need to be implemented. So we implement all those in virtualization, and then you can run them in a mode where so you can have something that uses the file system. And with the file system virtualization, you can actually mount local folders. It'll embed that folder, and then you can create a new component that doesn't depend on a file system import. And when it accesses the file system, it's just talking to that virtualized import inside of it that provides all the mounted files and folders. So the application still thinks it's running on a file system, but in reality, it could be running in a browser or Node.js without a file system and fully virtualized and encapsulated. And it's all of that encapsulation is within the component model itself. So just to share what that can do, it's not a demo, but at least demonstrating, what we've been working on and how it might relate to, the sort of potential for what, where Preview 2 on uvwasi can kind of integrate with these kind of things and at what level it does. So I just wanted to share some of that, and happy to discuss it if anyone has any questions or thoughts on the topic.
I'm just wondering what was there a particular use case, or they said, hey, we should go ahead and do this? I can see it's interesting. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, so a lot of, when you build applications, a lot of applications have these existing file system accesses. So a lot of people, building applications, they've written to these POSIX expectations. And so when you want to be able to adapt these things, either for, the proxy world, which is kind of this sort of server model, or if you want to run it in, these other encapsulated environments, like a browser or Node.js, you don't want it to just be accessing the host file system. So you want to kind of plug in this virtualization. It's a security thing as well. So you don't want to have these applications having access to the file system. So you want to just encapsulate it out and then create a component that doesn't have these POSIX kind of dependencies by managing that encapsulation. So it's an important aspect of how you map from the POSIX model to where you actually want to run your code, and doing that in a secure way.
So it's kind of like an alternative to specifying allowed file system directories or something. Is that? Yeah.
So it's happening at the code level basically, or at the I don't know what you call it, the binary level. So yeah, but it's similar, and it's encapsulated at so you can have different components having different levels of virtualization. So it's more like the defense in depth kind of model.
Okay, now I was just thinking, when you mentioned security, there's already the part that says only give it access to this subtree, right? But instead of doing that, you could just say, I'm going to virtualize it, and you really got access to nothing on the local file system.
Yeah, I guess especially where we could make it so that uvwasi just didn't give you access to the file system, but then what are you going to do when an application calls a file system call? Is it just going to throw and stop the world?
Right.
And so we do have currently the file system is only readable. I haven't done the writable side of it yet. So if you try to do a write, you will get an access error because it's read only. And we could do similar things. But yeah, trying to allow some level of customization in those cases where you don't have the control over the binary, over the build process to be able to kind of rewrite all your FS calls or whatever. And so you can do it at this kind of level in a configure. Yeah.
So a more concrete example is literally the grain compiler, where we ship the compiler, right? Like it's a CLI tool, and we have to include the standard library, which is written in grain itself. And then anytime you import a standard library thing, well, you don't have the files on your system, right? And so we have to map like pseudo file system paths to this internal embedded file system of the standard library. And the way that composing in Preview 2 works is so smart, because literally we could like have a version of our CLI that bundles the standard library and delegates the paths that would load the standard library to the embedded stuff, and then we just wrap around the API to the node FS or whatever, so that we can still read files from the file system, but fall back to the standard library imports when you try to load the standard library. I have somehow made a career out of doing this. I have wrapped every node FS API, every require, anything that touches the file system. I've done it in so many projects to get things to the example I just gave, or run on the web or whatever. Somehow I always get wrapped up in doing that. And so it's like so common. I've done it like 6 times in my career already.
Okay.
So having this and having a guy show how they're thinking about this is really, I think, important, and shows just like how good life is going to be. We don't need to mock out APIs because it literally is built into the technology.
Well, yeah, we're looking for early feedback. So any API feedback or anything like that is always welcome, and hope it gives some idea of also just the shape of Preview 2 to kind of see how things fit together.
Okay. Anything else that we should chat about before we close out this week?
One thing I can just add on that is I'm hoping to actually have an actual demo going. There's a Bytecode Alliance community call that happens once a month. So I'll be on that on Tuesday, presenting possibly a demo. So if anyone's interested, you're welcome to join in on that.
So let me just get the details of that. So you said the Bytecode Alliance, or if you had a link.
The monthly Bytecode Alliance community call. I can try and find the details quickly.
Yeah, I might as well just put them in. If you can find the link, we'll throw it in the minutes, and that way you can easily find.
I just posted it in the chat there. It's the community meetings.
Great.
Actually, that's the meetings. I'll post it in the chat. Sorry, in the meeting notes after this meeting.
Yeah, okay. If you want to post it in there, and I'll wait a little bit before I put it in.
Sure.
Okay. Any other topics or things we should chat about? No, thanks. Sorry, go ahead.
One thing, we don't need a release for my changes, and I can probably wait until we get the socket stuff done. But a release would be nice, just because I like to map. So like I'm bundling uvwasi into like a package manager essentially, right? And it would be nice to align the version that I release with a version of uvwasi, but my changes were not really a feature. So we didn't make a release for it, and I'm fine not making a release for it right away, especially because I'm still debugging some stuff. But like ideally it would be good to get a release out, probably with the socket stuff, since it seems to be fairly close. And then I we'll be able to pin my release to that.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think there's, at least from my perspective, I don't see if there'd be any reason why not. And we can check with Colin as well, but I'm not
Cool.
sure. The socket stuff, it'll kind of depend. I think it'll be one of those things, either it'll be easy to find the platform issues, or it'll be more complicated. So I wouldn't want to block on that, but
Okay.
sounds good.
Cool.
Any other topics or things? Okay, if not, thanks for everybody's time, and we will see you in GitHub and next time. Thanks. Bye.